So welcome to today's webinar, and thanks for joining us today for Spinout Success Stories, translating innovative ideas into attractive commercial propositions. So I'm Fiona Schaefer, one of the innovation managers at InnoScot Health. I'm the person based in southeast of Scotland, and I'm joined today with my colleague Ramsay, who covers the west. A couple of housekeeping things. We'll be recording the session, so it's available, just to let you know, so it's available for on the InnoScot website, also so you can share it with colleagues who were unable to join today. We also have opened there's Q&A, so please put your questions as they come, and we'll bring questions together towards the end. I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to today's webinar, and then we've got, delighted to be joined by Dr. David Brennan, who's now Chief Executive at Aurum, talking about his journey from being in NHS, in the NHS to leading Aurum, and Stuart Hendry, who's going to talk about some of the practicalities as well, tips and advice in relation to setting up new companies, and based on his experience with a number of startups over the last number of years, and we'll come together to have questions after that. So for those of you not familiar with us, which I think won't be many of you, we've been working with NHS innovators from across Scotland since 2002, and we were established to protect and commercialise NHS intellectual property. We've got quite a unique role in that, in terms of we can hold equity on behalf of NHS Scotland health boards, and that is very much relevant to today, although not in other areas. We're able to take financial risks that the NHS isn't in a position to do. And I mean, a lot of that came out of, and one of the reasons for us being publicly funded by the Chief Scientist Office is to actually be able to generate impact out of publicly funded initiatives, research and development as well. So our focus is very much on commercial strength and the health economic benefits of ideas, and absolutely aim as the aim of the goal, and where we're able to take on projects, there needs to be the potential for a financial return to the NHS, and also innovators. So today we have, or Scottish Health Innovations, and InnoScot Health has been involved in spinning out, I think, about seven companies now, and we hold equity in about 7 at the moment, and where we're holding that equity on behalf of the NHS or different NHS health boards, and we have different levels of involvement. Somewhere it's really just literally holding it on behalf of that health board. There is, however, still a prospective value of return then of around £15 million for those, and so that's quite, potentially, I think that's the common key thing to remember, is that Spinout's aware that's going to be, it's a high value proposition. It needs to actually have a real, it needs to be a big market. And I mean, certainly if you, during conversations with some Americans, actually you shouldn't be thinking about a new business unless it's going to have, it's part of a multi-billion pound market. There's different views on that, but it needs to have potential for high growth typically. But as you see there, actually it's more likely that we innovations and ideas, you're able to find a manufacturing partner to develop and commercial and license. Spinning out isn't the only way to actually generate value and actually bring new products to market. Spinout, here are some of the logos of our Spinout companies, and so we've been now over 20 years that we've been doing this and actually bringing together and building those innovations into something that's ready for its investor in some sort of investor ready form. So we act as that commercial interface between the NHS. I have still got, my apologies, some timing issue going on there. So Lister Skin was spun out from St Andrews and NHS Tayside as Ambicare, and it's proven light therapy products. And I'll say a little bit more about Touch, which was the first spin out from NHS Lothian. Very much it's about, there's only certain types of technologies and businesses that merit actually being turned into, or they actually are a business. So an idea is the idea, is it actually an innovation? Is it something that can actually be brought to life? It's actually, you know, it's cost effective to actually build and make something. And these are all the considerations we're taking when we're actually looking at those early ideas and inventions, innovations. Can you protect the intellectual property? Is there a package that's actually sealable or licensable? And actually, is it something that maybe actually working with a manufacturing partner already in that particular market, that can be a better outcome? But spin-outs are sort of very much have their place where it's something where that's not, it's going to need a lot of investment. You need to de-risk and to pull together a package which is potentially commercially viable. And I think Touch Bionics is a good way of thinking about, well, where do they come from? Is it just it's more than just a light bulb moment. There's often a lot of research and development. And David, when he joined, there were a number of years of research of developing bespoke products, bespoke devices and prosthetics for patients in NHS Lothian, which led into the idea that maybe how can you make an articulated hand? And that was the 2007, they brought the iLimb hand, that small circle image there. And we were involved in that, not only establishing the company, but taking it through and raising finance and assisting through that second round financing as well. And it was sold successfully to Azure. So that site in Livingston is still developing world-leading prosthetic technologies as part of Azure, and it recently gained further investment just earlier this year. So these are, they've got potential high growth, and they're also, high value jobs and, products that result in that. Anyway, rather than hearing more from me, I'm delighted that Dr. David Brennan is able to join us. He was previously the principal clinical physicist at Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow. So he's an NHS innovator who's made that successful transition. I'm sure it wasn't necessarily painless, but he'll share a bit about his innovation journey and talk a bit more about that sort of vast potential for the Aurum's technology, as actually having a kind of a technology that has more applications and has wider potential, or needs significant investment to go through clinical trials, for example, are some of the reasons why you might consider actually a spin out is actually relevant. And I think David's going to be talking a bit more about that. So I'm going to stop sharing my slide and to allow David to share. Is he sharing now? Great.
Right, there we go. So can you hear me now?
I'll go on silent now. Over you go. I think it's not showing slideshow from my perspective. That's it. Wonderful. Over to you, Dave.
No problem. Thank you very much, Fiona. Hello, everybody. As Fiona suggested, my name is David Brennan. I, as I say, originally was an MRI physicist, actually at the Institute of Neurological Sciences in Glasgow in the QEUH. It's been quite a long journey. So what I'm going to do today is explain a little bit about my journey. But first of all, before I do that, I just want to give you a quick introduction to the technology that Aurum is and what we're doing. So you've got an idea of what the company is and why we've decided to develop this and to push it forward. So I'm sure you've all heard of the rule of threes, the whole thing about survival priority. And that is where humans can survive. The idea is that humans can survive for about 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water. Sometimes actually people add in this 3 hours without shelter, and some people are a bit confused about that. But if you live in Glasgow, it's quite obvious why you would need to, you might only survive for 3 hours without shelter, and 3 minutes without air. Now these numbers are very rough; they're only kind of an idea, but it gives you an idea of the priorities for survival for humans and what we actually need. And obviously, air is the one that's the highest priority. Without that, in a very short space of time, you die. Now, actually, it's not air that we need. The one that's important for our survival is oxygen. So we all know that without air, without oxygen, we will die. But it's not as straightforward as that. And yes, we all know that if you drown, if you're stuck in water, you can't breathe, if you've got severe lung disease, etc., without enough oxygen, you will eventually die. However, it's also more of a situation as well with other organs. So you can have situations where certain organs are short of oxygen for whatever reason, and those organs put under stress, and eventually they will die, or parts of them will die. And that's the area that we are coming at, our technology is coming at. And these local areas of oxygen deprivation can occur because of things like, a blockage or swelling or something that in some way is blocking the blood from being able to flow to that part of the body. And that's something that's quite common in a number of different, diseases. And in fact, some of the largest disease, or the most significant diseases that we face in the world today. So I'm sure we all know that stroke, heart attack, traumatic brain injury are kind of big areas that affect an awful lot of people. But other areas as well that maybe not quite as much, like spinal cord injury as well, where you might not think that there is an issue with oxygen deprivation, but actually there can be, where following the injury there's increased swelling, which can actually cause things like secondary ischemia, or secondary shortage of oxygen, that can actually lead to the injury being worse down the line than it would have been had that not happened. So oxygen deprivation, localized oxygen deprivation, is a significant issue in a number of different diseases. So what's the solution? So you've got an issue here, you've got some sort of blockage, you may have a clot, for instance, or something like that that's broken off from somewhere and blocking some part of your tissue. What is the solution to be able to solve that problem? Well, what you're really looking for, if you are designing something to solve this issue, you would be looking for something that could carry significant amounts of oxygen beyond this blockage or this clot. You'd also be looking at something that could deliver oxygen in also some of the very small, what we call collateral vessels. So when you have a blockage, especially say for instance in your brain, some of the large vessels get blocked, your body tries to compensate by opening up some very small vessels that allow tissue or the blood to kind of flow around this blockage and get to it. Now these are small. Sometimes they're too small even for red blood cells to actually flow down, but they can to some extent keep tissues alive for a certain amount of time, but usually that's limited. You also need something that ideally, because of these issues of the blockage and the fact that the red blood cells can't get past, you need something that's significantly, ideally smaller than the red blood cells themselves. So in situations where red blood cells can't get somewhere, we want something smaller that can deliver the oxygen. And ideally as well, something that can carry significantly more oxygen than red blood cells as well. Now, I'm probably not going to spoil too much here by saying that this is exactly what we have. That's what our solution is. But before I do, I just wanted to highlight who has the solution, and that's us. It's Aurum Biosciences. And as Fiona had suggested, this was a spin-out company from NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, specifically from the QUH, or the Southern General, I think as it was known then, and in collaboration with the University of Glasgow. And what we have is patented technology, and with a large preclinical and clinical data package that comes with that, that we are using to drive us towards clinical trials. Now, again, this is something that needs significant investment to go forward. And we have a lot of investors, including the Wellcome Trust, Scottish Enterprise. InnoScot, as is mentioned, holds a lot of shares, etc., as well for the NHS as well. And I'll discuss them a little bit later. Immaculate Life Sciences, a large investment group, and a lot of other local and international private investors. So there's a lot of people who have come together, not just us who are working in it, that are making this, pushing this and driving this technology forward. So yes, this solution, this solution is, and here we have just an illustration of a kind of blockage that might be in a vessel where some sort of clot is broken off from some other part of the body and blocked this vessel, that's stopping the red blood cells from being able to move in, to get past this blockage. So I'm just going to see if the pointer thing works. Yeah, I think hopefully. So you can see the red blood cells are having kind of difficulty getting round and past this blockage. Especially in the brain, tissue can die within minutes without this oxygen supply. So the solution that Aurum has is we have what we call a product called ABL101, which is a perfluorocarbon emulsion. So it's an emulsion that we can inject, and this has particles that are up to 45 times smaller than red blood cells. And so therefore, if there's a blockage, if there's small amounts of gaps around this blockage, this can get past. It also happens to carry up to 4 times more oxygen than red blood cells for the same volume. So with these particular capabilities, any condition where there's a localized ischemia or oxygen deficit, as we call it, is a treatment target for ABL101. So as I've kind of suggested earlier, ABL101 and Aurum have this technology. What I've kind of talked about there is mostly the therapeutic aspects of this. You might have noticed I mentioned earlier on, I'm an MRI physicist by training. Originally, this was actually going to be developed as a diagnostic technology, because by getting this oxygen into certain parts of the brain, we can actually use MRI to detect any areas that are under oxidative stress. So that's how we were originally developing it. So it does have diagnostic technology uses as well. But obviously the biggest and probably the most beneficial overall in time is going to be the therapeutic aspects of that. And this opens us up to very large potential markets. So you've got some numbers there. Now, these are always finger in the air numbers, but effectively, these are the sort of size of the markets that we could potentially tap into. So when, what we're talking about, could this be multi-million, multi-billion kind of industry? It could do, but obviously there's a lot of work to go before we get there. So anyway, that's a kind of bit about the technology and the background of it. I could talk to you about that for hours, but obviously we don't have that time today. Today, really, what we were hoping to talk about was the journey. And so this, to some extent, it's about the journey for me personally as well. Because back in 2006, you can see that guy there with hardly any grey hair at all, Dr. Celestine Santos, who was a neuroradiologist at that time, walked into my office and tried to explain this exciting idea that he had, which at the time I probably didn't understand at all. As time moved on, as we kind of, these discussions went forward, I began to understand what he was talking about in this idea. And as I mentioned, originally that was a diagnostic, which we've further developed into a therapeutic as well. And over time, the path has led to me becoming CEO of Aurum Biosciences. Now, that absolutely was not a straight path. For a long time, I was working part-time NHS, part-time in the company as a project manager originally, but I've kind of eventually molded into this role of CEO as well. So how did I get here? So a number of things and a number of grants and a lot of money has come in to kind of help us move this forward. I don't mention InnoScot here. I will mention this in a separate slide later. They were obviously involved right from the very start. But as well as that, we had a lot of funding that came in right from the very small amounts at the start, which was the Neurosciences Foundation grant, which I think was about £9,000 that allowed us to do some very early MRI scanning tests. Scottish Enterprise Proof of Concept grant, which I think is called something different nowadays. CSO grants, Wellcome Trust. We've then gone into spinning out the company, have an investment, significant investment coming in of the order of £1 million, etc. Follow-on investment, and again, we're just going through. Well, we've just had another round of investment this year, and that's going to be completed with another amount very shortly, which is kind of driving us forward and driving the company forward. So money obviously is something, if you're going to spin out a company, you certainly need a lot of that. And you need to be able to convince investors and grant holders that what you've got is worthwhile. But as well as that, for me personally, it's been about a personal journey. I started off, as a scientist. Now I'm working as a CEO of a company. And that journey, again, wasn't a straight line. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to the Ignite course, entrepreneurship program course early on in Cambridge, and especially particularly lucky to go to the entrepreneurship development program at MIT in Boston, or the EDP as they call it in Boston, which was absolutely eye-opening. I remember going to that a lot, being really scared that I wouldn't be able to work with these people. I wouldn't have a clue what they were talking about. To then leaving that week to realizing that actually they didn't have a clue. They had as little of a clue as I had in developing the companies. It's really just about a lot of common sense. But also I've had a lot of on-the-job learning. So effectively my journey has been from effectively being a scientist in 2006 to being somebody who effectively is running the kind of commercial side of the business in 2024. So that, as I say, has been quite a significant journey, and obviously along the way, I've had a lot of help from Shill, as they were initially called originally, now InnoScot Health. So they have been there from the very beginning, and in fact, their involvement has been significant in that when we came to spin out the company, somebody from Shill. Now, this won't happen for everybody, but somebody from Shill actually left Shill and actually became our CEO at that time. So the help has been significant over the years, as in, helping us, especially when it comes to doing patent work, etc., which I think Stuart's going to talk about later. That was very early on. We had to get all of that correct and understand what patents we had, what intellectual property we had. They've helped to drive us forward with every aspect effectively of our commercialization and made a huge impact in getting us to the point of spinning out the company. And it would not have happened without InnoScot's help at that point. Absolutely not. And they're still helping us today. So, David, who's I think on the call today, has been helping us with some of our communications, etc., coming out. InnoScot are still involved with the kind of helping us with getting in the investment, etc. And the chairman of InnoScot as well is also the chairman of Aurum Biosciences. So the connection is very, very strong, and we've had a huge amount of help from them. So if anyone is ever looking for help or thinks they've got a potential spin out, please do speak to them, because they will be able to help you along that path all of the way. But one of the things that David, what was asked from InnoScot was the question that I would nice to answer was, at what point did we know was Aurum going to be a potential spin-out company? And I kind of had to sit and think about this, because we've been doing this for a long time, as I say, since 2006. I had to kind of go back and look at some of our old presentations, etc., to find out when did we come to that realization. And I think it came probably around about 2007 on this very, very messy slide. This was actually from our application, our presentation we gave to Scottish Enterprise to try and go for the proof of concept money as it was at the time. And this is where we were trying to explain where we were going to go and what we thought the future for the project was. Now, if we ignore all the Scottish flags, because there are an awful lot of them there, which I think we were trying to point out that this was all going to bring value for Scotland. You can see there's effectively there's two real courses that we could have gone. And the licensing up until this point here was what we thought originally we were going to be doing, partly because we were also thinking this was going to be an imaging technology initially rather than therapeutic. But at this time, once we started writing this stuff out with the help of InnoScot and others to kind of develop this application, we started realizing, wait a minute, this thing is potentially huge. It's potentially very, very big. And because of that, the amount of money that we would need invested in this would be significant as well. And so at this point, I think we were starting to think, yeah, I think we might actually need to create a company at this point. And actually, anyway, it has the biggest Scottish flag, so it must be the right choice. That's all I can say. So yeah, as time went on, it became more and more obvious that that was absolutely the only way that we'd ever be able to drive this forward. And so that's why we are where we are today. So where are we actually today? Well,
David,
yes.
can you kind of try and wrap it?
This is my last slide.
Okay,
so basically, yeah, no problem. This is where we are today. Aurum is manufacturing. We're going through the process of manufacturing our batches for running clinical trials, and our aim is in 2025 to at least have 1, potentially up to 3 clinical trials running in stroke, in carotid plaque imaging, and in spinal cord, with potential trials in 2026. So exciting time for us, keeping us busy. And as Fiona mentioned, it is definitely not a straight path. And I could talk for hours about this. Sorry if I'm running over the time. But if anyone wants to ask any questions later on or wants to speak to me, that's my contact details. Okay, that's me. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, David. Yeah, no, I think do put your questions in the Q&A, and I will move swiftly on. I'm going to be sharing Stuart's slides. Let's see if I can make sure that that works smoothly. There we go. Hopefully can somebody confirm that that's sharing okay? That's great. Okay, over to you, Stuart.
Fiona, thank you very much, and Francis and the rest of the team at InnoScot Health for asking me to come along today. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all well. Thanks for being interested enough to want to learn a bit more about spinouts. So by brief introduction, I think if we just probably move that first slide on, Fiona. I work in a commercial law firm, and we specialize in helping companies basically spin out and basically go on a journey, just like what David's been describing. And ultimately, our job is, in many cases, is to help the founders basically take the technology that they've had this idea on and basically turn it into a business, and in many cases that means a global business operating in global markets and having to raise investment from all sorts of sources and from investors to build up this company and to effectively then ultimately give the founders and the investors an opportunity to realize that investment. So in other words, there's all going well, there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, albeit maybe after today's finished with the UK budget, maybe that pot of gold might be slightly smaller than what it might have been earlier today, but we'll have to wait and see. So this slide is really just, and I understand that a number of you in the call may be interested in spinning out or just want to find out a little bit more about what it actually means. But it is literally taking the idea that you may have within your organization, whether it's the relevant NHS trust or if you're working somewhere else. And it's then effectively saying, right, as David was saying, the route is to create a new company and ultimately to get the technology into that company, and then get a whole team set up to run the company, to grow the company. You've got to fund the whole thing, and you've got to go on this journey, because even just once you've raised the funding, you're just at the start. And I guess the key principle about spinning out is that, as a rule of thumb, if you during the course of your employment create intellectual property, whatever that might be, then as a sort of general rule of thumb, the law in the UK is that the employer owns that intellectual property. And so what that then means is that if you're working within an NHS trust as an employee and you're paid to work on certain projects, then I anticipate that what happens is that the NHS trust as your employer will actually own the intellectual property. And then really this point about the spin out process is that it's not just you deciding to set up a company, it's also about negotiating with the NHS with the help of the team at InnoScot Health to get that intellectual property either transferred into the company or in many cases, it might be licensed into the company and then it then transfers across at a later date. I've been involved in a number of spin-outs over the years, and some of them from the NHS. David may not know, but I was actually the lawyer that was acting for the investors for the funding going into Aurum Biosciences. So that happened simultaneously at the time of the spin-out. So my job was to, I guess, help negotiate the deal for the investors, and that's very much looking at all the documentation in terms of making sure there's a really good IP all the way from whichever NHS trusts were involved, and making sure that there's a good flow, and we can actually see that the right IP is coming across from the right trust into the company. So that was one, and then another one I acted for and all the way through was Touch Bionics, or Touch EMAS, as Fiona mentioned, it used to be called. And again, I was acting for the investors there, and that was the super exciting company with this sort of new upper arm prosthesis, and then also with the digits if you're losing your fingers. And then there's lots of other types of spin out, or there's been companies or individuals we've acted for who are maybe working in the NHS and then they set up their own business. And Aurum Health that I mentioned there, that's effectively an equipment manufacturer based in Edinburgh, and they're involved in the whole area of hemodialysis, EOS Surgical, a couple of lovely surgeons who decided to set up a sort of training devices and software to help train surgeons in keyhole surgery. And I remember my son was in the sick kids hospital having an operation, and then one of the surgeons came out and pulled his mask down, and lo and behold, it was Roland, who I knew from EOS Surgical. So he's got two jobs at the same time, being a surgeon, during the day, but also having to get this company set up as they did, and that was just, I think, recently sold. And then Novosound, I just mentioned, that was a spin out from University of West of Scotland, not the NHS. But that's one where they've just recently launched a blood monitoring device, and we've just helped them complete a 2 million funding round. And they've raised quite a lot of money, actually. They've raised many, many millions. So that's the sort of the sort of journey. It's not just about the idea you've got, it's about actually turning it into what ultimately is a global business. And you've got to make sure that, that there's a lot to do there. Fiona, if you move on to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. And and I guess the thing about spin-outs and what I've described, it's not for the faint-hearted. And you can probably work that out based on the number of emojis that I've decided to put on the screen. Ultimately, it's it's all very well negotiating and getting set up and doing the deal, and then you've then got to raise the investment, which is hard work. It isn't easy, but ultimately good companies with good ideas, with a really good team of people that you built around you, will get funding. But of course, you've then got to go and actually make it a success commercially in the marketplace, and that can take many years. Ultimately, the real question, I guess, is what's the proposition? Is it fundable? Have you got something that product's going to sell, and is it scalable? So these are the questions that investors will ask, and just actually even just thinking on Touch Bionics, which obviously went to a successful exit, as Fiona was mentioning. So there was a return of investment for the founders and the investors. But actually, if I'm probably being blunt, the investors maybe didn't appreciate that the size of the market on upper arm prosthesis isn't actually as large as the lower limb market. And the market for that company was very much selling into the US, and then in particular selling to people who've been in the armed forces and been in conflicts, who are then getting their new arm from the with the help of Medicare and insurance in the US. There's a lot to the journey. It's not for the faint-hearted. But that said, there are real rewards for those that decide to go for it. I think the great thing about the opportunity that everyone has if you're thinking about spinning out is that you're all working at the coalface. And I think there's a opportunity really to work out what the problems are and then decide to do something about it and build a product or an offering around that problem. I think too many founders probably decide to build something and then decide and wonder whether there's a market for it. And so I actually think that everyone is very much uniquely placed within what the work that you'll all be doing within the NHS. So I think that's fantastic. In terms of just maybe the next slide, I don't have many slides. This is the last one, and I'm just conscious of time. But in terms of, I guess, sort of trying to ultimately, make sure that is doing a spin out the right thing for you. I think you've got to speak to other people, like David, for example, ask him about the journey and others, and go and track down Dr. David Gow, lovely man. You'd probably catch him on LinkedIn, from Touch Bionics, and there'll be others. And I think you've also got to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are and what's your appetite for risk. Setting up a new company, a spin-out company, and getting it funded, it's probably fair to say it's not for the faint-hearted, as I've said. And lots of companies, you'll find that most companies probably need more money than you think. You'll need more money at different, parts of the journey. But ultimately, I guess the opportunity here is to really take an idea and to say, right, we want to be able to change people's lives. And I think that's the most, fundamentally, I think that's the the thing that probably drives everyone. And I've had so much delight in seeing people who've spun out and have turned their ideas into effective global businesses, and they're being able to change people's lives on a global basis every day. And we've got lots of companies that have done that in Scotland. I'm sure that Aurum Biosciences, clearly from what it's doing, it's life-changing in terms of what it can do. But in terms of, I guess, the tips as on the screen, that probably the most important thing is that you've really got to do your homework. You've got to make sure that you've got a credible business plan that's going to be exciting. You've got to make sure that, I think, as part of that, it's going to be really attractive to get investor interest. And I think the other thing is that, do you have defendable intellectual property? So do you have patents? If you have patents, which is I guess a type of registrable IP, then investors like patents because it gives you monopoly rights to commercialize a certain technology. So those are the sorts of things. You've got to have a really good, credible plan. You've got to work out what your market is. I think if the investors in Touch, Bionics were doing it again, they'd probably go for lower limb prosthesis rather than upper limb, because the market is actually so much bigger on the lower limb area. That's my personal view. And I think the other thing, you've got to have a great team that you assemble. You have to have people that don't just understand the technology like you guys in a clinical setting. You've got to have people on your board who've actually successfully raised funding and taken companies all the way through to successful exit and realization event. Ultimately, what the investors are doing is that they are backing horses. This is, it's a form of betting in a way, and they are backing horses. And you've got to make sure that the jockey, if you like, or the board of directors is the best jockey you've got the best board of directors, because you can have the best idea in the world, but if you don't have the right people running the company to take the company forwards, and it is a race, then they're probably not going to basically put their money on you and back your company. So I would say that the business plan's key, building the team is key. Make sure you've got really experienced professionals involved, and I think if you can do all these things, good companies with spin-outs will get funded, and there are a number of investors based in Scotland that do specialise and focus in this area. So it's it's a very exciting area. And, you know, I would say that, you know, if you have the appetite for it, absolutely go for it. And, you know, the sky's the limit. I think that's probably it for me, Fiona, and hopefully I've not
That's
spoken for
great.
too long.
No, that's great. And you've highlighted a number of key points, which I had notes to highlight, so I don't save me from that. We now have time for a few questions. I think I've seen one come in on Q&A. There's maybe others, I think, that Francis has. So I'll maybe leave Francis to ask the questions, if that's okay.
Yep.
And
Hi,
apologies.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's really interesting information given there. So a question came in from Richard, David, and it was particular to hearing the Aurum story. It's all around IP, and Stuart, you touched on that as well. Really just a question on how you've managed to maintain the value of the IP because of the kind of a time frame from the start of conception to just now, and how you kind of managed to keep that alive, I think, is the round about the question.
No, it's a good question, and it's something that I think is something you need to be kind of managing ongoing. One of the things that Aurum did, we had a lot of our IPs kind of around the imaging side of it, and not the therapeutic aspects, because that was difficult, because people had suggested that the technology we were developing could potentially do that before we got out there and market. So we did stagger some of that. The IP, the patents that came out, there were 3 that we've got, and they kind of did stagger them, so that kind of extended the period of time that were covered. But as well as that, for us, I suppose it comes down to the fact there's more to IP than just patents, and that we have a lot of know-how that we've kept ourselves, but also we've got a lot of the preclinical and clinical data that's incredibly important for us to take this to the market. So effectively, when we come to market authorization, where this becomes a product that's sellable, the information that we have, all this preclinical data, and in a lot of areas, like say in the US and in Europe, you've got some market authorization protection that kind of protects you to some extent with that data as well, so other people can't use your data to be able to develop that technology. So it's around keeping a package and keeping things going, and also, as we're moving forward, also continually looking to see if there's any other IP that we can generate.
Yeah. Stuart, do you want to add anything to that, or around about the IP kind of side of things?
Not at all. I mean, I guess the key thing is that you have to have a strategy in terms of, you know, commercialization development, but ultimately, it's important to raise investment that you've got defensible tech, you know, through patents. Investors will, you know, do due diligence on you in terms of your freedom to operate. So, you know, there's work to do here. There are people that can help you do it. It'll be important to make sure that you take advice from, you know, a firm of patent agents where they have someone that specializes in the area of technology you're looking at. And then ultimately, again, it's very relevant when companies, when they're at a much later stage and they're looking to maybe go for a sale, it's very important, again, about, well, actually, how strong or otherwise is the portfolio of patents that quite often that the target company will have at that point. And in some cases, believe it or not, the first kind of sign of interest from, you know, the large global corporate is that they send you a letter saying, hey, you're infringing our patent. That's often the first stage of negotiation in some cases. So but you have to have a strategy, but, you know, there's lots of people out there that can help you with it.
Yeah. On the back of that as well, David, there's another question came in, and it's really about funding. We always get asked about funding all the time, and I think really round about it is that, you know, how do you cope, and how do you hope to fund like further phases for commercialization? I suppose top tips and that type of thing. And
Yeah,
like,
well,
you know, just sum that up. Simple.
I think the top tip is there's never enough funding, no matter, you know, you always need more than you think. Funding is a big part of my job ongoing. I think I guess certainly since I've took the role. I was involved with it when I was the kind of project management, but obviously it's a major part of my job now in CEO. You're in constant fundraising. Even once you're fundraised, you're fundraising again, and you're always planning for fundraising. And so, you know, we're just in the process of just finishing off our second tranche from this round of fundraising, and we're already planning for the next round. We need to get the business plan, etc., in place. It's always just being open to different opportunities. It's, you know, your obviously investment is great and brings money in. If you can get grants, etc., then that's obviously a great way of doing that as well. And so we are constantly as well looking at grant opportunities and applying for that. If there's any trials, etc., we can do. To go on to the major trials, that we're about to go a big step up in our funding. This is the last lot of kind of seed funding that we were probably going to be raising, and we'd probably be going on to what you call Series A, which is kind of significantly larger amounts going forward. So it's a constant. It's just a fact of life in any business. You're going to be constantly battling to funding, and you've got to keep your options open as much as you can and continually be working towards that next round.
Thank you. And thanks. I think finally, we get a question. Have we got time for one more?
Maybe one
quick one. So just to open it out to both Stuart and David then. So what do you think are the key qualities for innovators considering setting up new businesses?
David, you wanted me to go first?
Yes, I'll let you go first.
Tenacity.
I mean, all I would say is that I think, first of all, you've got to be curious. I think you've probably got to be dogged as well. You've got to it's about, I think, finding a problem in the market where you can see it's a great market and you can see there's an opportunity to do something about it. And you've got to be really passionate about it, probably to the point where your friends are going to hate you that you keep talking about this problem, or your colleagues, you think this person's obsessed. But I think probably you find that you have to be really passionate about something for a start, and then ultimately you've got to have bags of resilience, and you've got to I guess ultimately at some point you probably have to decide, am I working in NHS or am I working in this new company? They're not the same, okay? You might find that, so taking the leap into a company, you know, that can be a brave thing to do. There'll be no, you'll be on a no thrills, if I could call it that, you know, salary package, a startup package. You get options over shares. You get shares as the founder, which basically means that you're going to make nothing from those shares unless actually you can take this thing all the way through over many years to then make it really successful and go to a successful sale. So unless you can do that, you know, you're going to probably find that you're on reduced earnings, potentially. And so, as I said at the start, it's not for the faint-hearted, but there are plenty of people who've done it and have had massive rewards. And when I say rewards, it's not just about money. It's actually, for most people, it's about actually seeing what's happening in terms of, you know, your idea and actually suddenly changing lives. And I think that's the thing that I find the most exciting thing is seeing people. And it's not just about selling. I was speaking to one of the founders last week where we successfully sold their business. And it doesn't matter what it was, but it was food tech. But what was interesting was that there was a company, set them up 2011, 4 rounds of funding, VC funding. We went through the successful sale, and the founder's like, you know, Stuart, this is just a new chapter in the journey for me, because actually this is all about where I can see food tech going, and that company is now basically, you know, part of a global business, and what it means is that technology will no longer be in, say, 40 countries. It will be in 150 countries within 2 years, and that's super exciting. So you should go for it.
That's that sounds like is that okay if we maybe round up now? I think that's quite some nice positive ways to end today. I wanted to quickly just say remind anybody that you can go online and book a call with us, or you can submit an idea. Even if we're not something we can help, we're we're very well connected in the ecosystem, and one of the things that sort of came up is that kind of understanding that moving from being an NHS person or, you know, professional, learning about that whole entrepreneurial environment, and, you know, building those skills. We have, you know, a number of different, something funny is happening on my screen at the moment, sorry, and essentially there's quite a lot strong ecosystem from that educational training and learning about some of those skills. TechScaler now exists, although it's for absolutely anybody. You don't, nothing to do with it, not connected, but very much to healthcare, but very much available for anybody who wants to just even see what's it all about and learn about that, right through to, you know, really helping companies take part of sort of international programs. So there's quite a strong ecosystem, and we can signpost and link people into that. And also that our our next webinar is focusing on some good stories from innovators, nursing and midwifery, and hopefully give you some inspiration for, you know, also to innovate and to come up ideas as a maybe one of the things we might have talked about if we'd had more time was, you know, the benefit of diversity and, you know, all encouraging a wider range of people to be, you know, see themselves as innovators. It's not all about Spinout, although obviously we focus on it, but there's lots of different ways that you can innovate and get involved in these, even working with industrial partners and things like that we can help support you with.